Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all. As you know, my talks are always very simple and focusing on the new learners and those new to botany wanting to develop their botany. So I apologise if you know lots of this already, but I think there's always things to find and discover. And last year, I know when I was talking to you, I was talking about the fact we all love being out in the field and learning about the flowers and identifying that way, but it's actually not a very good way to build up a structure and a framework on which to try and develop your own learning in the long term, unless you're very lucky and you can go out with somebody more or less every week and learn lots, you know, in your local area. So part of my teaching, as I said last year, was about looking at the flower structure, first of all, and becoming very familiar with all the main components so that when you're looking at plants in the field, you do feel very confident about this. And the other component is about really trying to understand the terminology in the keys, because a lot of it is really quite inaccessible to someone who's new to botany. And I've kind of worked on both of those things over the last 15 years, really working on teaching botany, which I'm very lucky to do, and the indoor sessions that we have both here in Northumberland and in Teesdale. And more recently, I've kind of got involved more in the family side of things. And whilst I've been looking at ways to, you know, access the terminology for the keys and look at the structure of the flower, I've got more and more involved in the different families that we've been, and I'm using them as really a vehicle to teach. And especially with COVID, some of you might have seen, I wrote quite a few articles called A Bit of Botany, and they were mainly focusing on the families. And, you know, because really there was no other way to learn anything. So I was kind of focusing on all the things that were growing around the doors where people lived. So I really had to research the families and try and find ways to get people to be able to access the plants. And I just got really involved in it, and it got very fascinating and interesting. And I got reverted to all my old botany books, which I've got quite a few of, with all their lovely drawings. And so I suppose that's really where it developed. And now I do teach the families most of the time at the start of the season as a way of bringing our botany on. And one of those families is the daisy family. And, you know, just like many of the other big families, once you get into it, there's just so much to learn, and you don't always see it when you're keying out because you don't use all the features. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it. And just to get started, I'm just going to remind us of a few of the common members of the daisy family. Just some photographs. This one, goldenrod, I don't know how common it is further south, but this grows on the rocky limestoney bits on the river in the Tees, at the side of the Tees, and it's tiny up here and really pretty. And it comes out reasonably early, so it's lovely to see early on. And of course, we all know common knapweed. It's very important plant for the pollinators and in the grasslands. Antinary dioica, the mountain everlasting. I hadn't realised, you know, when I first identified this plant that it was dioecious. And quite often you get large amounts of one gender and it's reproducing vegetatively. And that was the case here in Allenheads, where we just had one huge patch of the plant. But I didn't know so much about Antinaria then. It was about 20 odd years ago. And it just disappeared. And I hadn't realised that it was just probably going to be one gender there. And it just went and it's never come back. And I keep looking around and looking and hope that it might be somewhere else that I've missed. But I just think it's gone like it has in some parts of Teesdale. But on the other hand, there are other areas where it is really doing quite well. And we've got various people surveying it. The melancholy thistle, of course, another lovely plant, this lovely dropping heads later on in the year, the dropping heads. And the sow thistle, you know, which looks a bit prickly and unattractive, but actually the flower's gorgeous. I think it's so symmetrical and lovely. And there's a bit of mouse-eared hawkweed without any flowers, but just reminding us of its habitat. The marsh thistle, which of course you get the white version as well, quite commonly. Sneezewort, growing in the wetter bits. Our speciality up here, Crepus mollis and northern hawksbeard, which I think I've said to you before, we probably over-recorded because there's three of us look for it all the time. So there's probably more of it in West Allen Valley, but the East Allen, where we survey a lot of it, we keep finding more patches. It keeps disappearing. And then just last year, I was just walking out of Allen Heads and I looked over this very steep bank and it was covered in Crepus mollis and it had never grown there ever before, as far as I know. And it had disappeared in all the other areas around that point. It's really odd how it spreads. Anyway, I spent quite a long time climbing down a very wet bank trying to make sure it was Crepus mollis, which I thought was probably a bit mad later, but it was worth it to see it all. And the tiny little white seed heads are the indicator of what it is when it's growing in this kind of area. Yarrow I'm going to come back to. Okay, so just to get us in the zone of the daisy family. It is one of the largest families in the British Isles, mainly herbaceous plants, and very effective both in terms of pollination and seed dispersal, as well as being a really good vegetative reproducer in many examples. Now, each head is a densely packed head. I mean, to the layperson, they just look like petals, but of course, they're tiny flowers called florets, and they're attached onto a disc-like receptacle, sometimes with scaly bracts, which are obviously helpful in identification, and they're all inserted into this capitulum or receptacle. And if we look at a little diagram here to help us, if we're not sure about that structure, basically the receptacle is a section through, so you can see that there's the involucre on the outside is made up of lots of bracts, which is very helpful in their arrangement sometimes in helping us to identify individual species. And the receptacle itself has the florets inserted on the top. And there can be two main types, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. This is just to really show the arrangement and the way in which the ligulate and tubular flowers are inserted, how many there are and which ones depends upon the species. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So that's what it looks like when all the achenes, the bases of the little florets, have come out and floated off in a pappus of hairs. But the thing to think about is that that tiny floret has the whole of a flower condensed into it, which I think is really quite remarkable. So that's just a plan of a flower on the left. So just for those of us who aren't that familiar with, the main structure, you've got your sepals and petals, then you've got your female carpel in the middle with the ovary, the style and the stigma, and then all the stamens around the outside. Now, all of that is condensed into this tiny little floret, which I think is quite remarkable. So in the next diagram, I've labelled them. So here you see the corolla, which instead of having a ring, is just this one, in this case, a ligulate floret. And then the stamens here are fused around the tube. And I've got a better photograph in a second I'm going to show you. But the carpel here, the ovary, the style, and this bifurcate stigma, that forms the carpel. And of course, there's no sepals here. Instead, you've got mainly you've got a pappus of hairs, but it can be bristles or a membranous ring or nothing there. So all that flower structure is condensed into this tiny arrangement, which I think is amazing. Now, just on a diagram here, just to kind of emphasize that. And I think this diagram shows the 5 stamens attached around the style much more clearly than the first photograph. And I've just drawn a little plan there to explain. You've got your stigma there, there's the style, there's the anthers, and then you've got your ovary underneath here, which actually I stuck another one in there because that one didn't really show that very clearly, but that one there that shows the ovary quite nicely. So that's the basic structure. But, but the actual floret can be zygomorphic like this one, where it's not it's not symmetrical, or it can be radially symmetrical like the tubular florets, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. So that's the basic structure. And if you look at a knapweed, this has got tubular florets. So here, I think actually I didn't realize I was going to get this talk when I was doing this, and so I didn't really get very good examples of the individual florets. But I think you can see quite nicely. There's the tubular arrangement. This is the here you can see the stamens around the style. The bit didn't get very well was the actual stigma. So even when I sectioned it here, you can see the tubular arrangement, this kind of little divided section at the top. Sorry. And in the next one, yeah, so this is an individual one, bent round. There you see the stamens, but I just haven't managed to get a very good photograph. This is very sensitive of the stigma at the top. So the tubular florets can be of two types. Stage just calls them all tubular, but Streeter subdivides them, and I do think it's helpful to understand that there are two sort of different versions, if you like, of the tubular one. There's a smaller disc one here, and it has a much more reduced length, and this has got a much longer tube, and the kind of corolla lobes at the top are turned back. Yeah, so same as the ligulate in the sense that it's got, you know, the stamens wrapped around the style, forked stigma, and the corolla tube here, but just radially symmetrical, not just on one side. Okay, so two types of floret, but the third one, if you count disc and tubular, as a subdivisions. Okay, now because of this, we get different types of flower head. We get the ligulate flower head or the ray flower head, like the dandelion, where they're all ligulate flowers. You get the discoid flowers, where they're all tubular or disc-like thistles. And then the radiate flowers have got disc florets in the middle, surrounded by various versions of ray florets. So, you know, it's quite a lot of variation within the family. And even within those, especially with the radiate flowers, there's quite a lot of variation in what type of floret is present in terms of the gender and, you know, whether they're male or female or both or so on. So let's take the ligulate flowers first. There's a couple of examples there to show you, and you can see nicely the forked stigmas all the way around there in that ring, and again in here, you know. And if you get out tomorrow morning, get in the garden, there's loads of dandelions out. Well, they're on my garden because I grow them on purpose, of course, not. But there's lots. It's a really good time to get out and see them and pull them to bits, and as long as you leave plenty for the bees. No, it's just the head. Discoid flowers. So here the tubular ones, like the thistles there, all entirely tubular. So that's called a tubular head or discoid head. Now the radiate heads, like this is leopard's bane. This one, you've got the central region of disc florets. And I did this one because you can see the fertile ones on the edges are all, you see the stigmas and things there. And the longer ligulate florets on the outside. So if we look at the daisy, similar kind of radiate arrangement, tubular disc florets in the middle, surrounded by rays. Now the outer ray florets are female here, but that's not always the case. The inner discs are both fertile and bisexual. And that's the most common one of the radiate families, where the outer ones are female and the inner ones are both male and female. And that's a close-up to show the ray florets here, which are female. I didn't get any to show the actual female structure, stigma. And this is a close-up of the disc florets here. And you can just see here and there where they're opening up. And it's not a very clear photograph there, but just to give you the idea. I don't know if it's clear. I can't see for the photographs if it's any better around that corner. So they're bisexual in the middle. The sunflower has ray florets, which are usually sterile this time, and then the tubular florets are bisexual. So it does vary from species to species. Now, the outer ligulate flowers, which are more numerous, they don't have stamens. So essentially, you know, if they're not going to be male, they don't have stamens, they're female. The tubular florets can only make pollen, although they do have a vestigial ovary. It doesn't, sorry, I've just jumped here. No, you don't. Sorry, I'll go back and start again for that bit. So now I'm going to talk about the coltsfoot, which is, I think, really interesting structure. And the outer ligulate flowers here are more numerous and they don't have stamens, so they are female. The inner ones can only make pollen, so they're male, although there is a vestigial ovary, like a small remains of an ovary there, but it doesn't develop. They don't self-pollinate because of there's a space between, a gap between when they mature, so that cross-pollination is encouraged, but they can self-pollinate. There is an overlap if necessary. So I think the coltsfoot flower is really a beautiful flower, and you can see there they're very fine, the ligulate flowers there. And remember, they're female, and then the inner ones, there's far less of them. They've got these lovely little tubular florets, and they only make pollen, so they're the males there. And that's really, I mean, you never think when you look at a coltsfoot that's got such a lovely flower. It's when you get close up to it, I think they're fabulous. And there's an even better photograph to show you. And you can see all the pollen there as well, and the female on the outside, and then structure. Like nice close-up of the tubular florets there. And that's a diagram just to show you how it works. You've got these triangular bracts on the flower stem, and then you get these longer bracts coming up here. And then you've got your ligulate florets arranged, and then the tubular ones are all in the middle like that. And that's really what they look like, you know, as a drawing there. So if you go back to the diagram again there, you see how that relates to there's the ligulate ray florets there. There's the tubular ones. No, that's a section through that to show that arrangement. If anybody's got any questions, you can just drop them in the text before I go on. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I actually can't see for the, I'm not going to shrink that. Yeah, I've done that. I can't see anybody but now, but I've managed to see I can't see the photograph on the right. So this is a tubular floret from the middle, and this is the female there from the ligulate one from the outside. And you can see nicely the anthers there attached around there. And here, that would be the same. That's the drawing there for that one. And this is the ligulate flower here. You can see the pappus of hairs and the ovary at the bottom. And of course, when that gets fertilized, it becomes an achene. But that won't happen in the flowers that aren't bisexual. Now, another interesting radiated flower is the yarrow Killia, and this has both ligulate and tubular florets as well. And again, they're quite surprising when you look at them close up because, you know, when you look at them from a distance, I mean, I think they're quite a challenge really to classify as a member of the daisy family when you're just learning about the group, because they look so different. You know, in some ways they look a bit like a member of the carrot family, but obviously close up you can see then they've got these really quite fat little ligulate flowers and the disc flowers in the middle. So tubular florets and ligulate florets, and you can see that quite nicely there. Now you can see stigma, that one. So basically, just going back up them again, we've got this one, the coltsfoot, which is a radiate flower with quite a small number of these disc florets in the middle. And then we've got the same kind of idea with the Achillea, you know, but much different arrangements of the flower, and also they're much fatter the ligulate flowers and structure. So, in summary, the disc florets are usually bisexual. They're the ones in the middle. And the ray florets can be bisexual, female, or sterile. So there's quite a lot of variation, and you just need to be getting to know the species really to understand which ones are sterile, which ones are fertile. And obviously you can take them apart and have a look, but we don't want to be always doing that with the flowers if we can avoid it. But you can see the disc florets quite clearly. Now, interestingly, there's some variations on this, and which I hadn't realised this until I was researching this family book. Echinops, the glow thistles, which are mainly, garden escapes and neophytes and things, but they only have one floret per head. But then the heads are arranged together to form this globose head. So there's only one floret per head, but the heads are all then joined together. So it's got multiple heads to form this kind of globose arrangement, which I thought was quite interesting. And the butterbur, now, this is another dioecious member of the daisy family. Can everybody hear? Because I've got a notification that my sound's poor. Can you hear? Okay.
If you can't put in the chat, the sound is fine for me.
Okay, right. It's just it came up with sound was poor. So
the sound is fine for me.
okay.
Somebody else has replied. Amanda said it's fine for her as well. So
that's good. Okay. Now the
it's
butterbur.
quite fascinating, Lizzie. Actually, I'm hanging on every word here.
Well, the butterbur, I was actually I never really looked closely at the butterbur. I've got to be honest, because I mean, you know what a butterbur is. That's what I mean. Because you know what things are, you don't actually look that closely at them. But because I was doing this talk, I thought I'm going to have a look, and then I didn't even realize they were dioecious, which is my fault. I haven't researched it properly. But then I discovered that they're mainly male flowers in certain parts of the country. Now, I found them really tricky to work out what was what. This is that you can see the flowers on the left here. This is the terminal raceme, but here the flowers have got a really odd arrangement. The male flowers have got this clavate, like club-shaped sterile stigma for a start, and I think that's what I've got, a male flower. And I'd look, if anybody knows, is an expert on the butterbur, please just at the end contribute. And apparently if it's the female, they've got a ring of stigmas all around the edge of the flower. And I found it really quite hard to get good information and good photographs anywhere on it, So this is something for your homework, really. Have a look at some butterburs and see if they're male or female, and find out a bit more about it. And when you do, you can tell me. But this here, these are the clavate male flowers here, and as a discoid, and they've got ligulate. I think they've got ligulate flowers around here. Tubular. Sorry, the marginal flowers are tubular. Beg your pardon, that's wrong. Marginal flowers are tubular, and they've got these very different arrangement to normal. So, because I thought there were lots of female flowers in a ring, but they're not. I'm pretty sure that's the male. And I haven't got any females. I did look, but I don't know how, it's a bit like when you look for dog's mercury and you find loads of one kind in one place. I think we've got more chance of finding the females up here, so I will keep looking and try and get some photographs. But I would be interested if anybody's come across it and knows a bit about it. Yeah. Oh, there's in the photograph. Yeah. And I think these are the stamens, but I'm really not sure about that. I couldn't find any drawings anywhere. It was quite interesting what little information there was about them. So that's the flower structure, really. And I just wanted to say, obviously, I mean, I'm talking about the flowers because I think they're a puzzle for people, especially when they start botany. But obviously, when you're looking at this group, there's lots of important features in the vegetative aspects of the plant, and especially the leaves. So, I mean, we know these, and you know, it's the leaf structure varies a great deal, and it's very important whether there's leaves on the stem or not, and you know, whether they're pinatified or not. And there's no stipules, that's one thing, but really there's quite a lot of variation otherwise in the vegetative structure. So that's the daisy part of the talk, and I've nearly finished actually, but so if anybody's got any questions about that, I can maybe do that now, or do you want to do it at the end? Or shall I carry on? Let's carry on.
Yeah, just carry on, I think.
Okay. So then I was thinking, you know, the reason why I started this all together was because I thought there's so many flowers that look, you know, they've got big heads and lots of little flowers, and it must be quite hard when you're just a beginner and you're looking at these to try and work out where they all belong. So the thrift, again, you know, I mean, obviously they've got very different structures in terms of numbers of stamens, position of the ovary. I'm talking about all the families that I'm going to talk about now. There's lots of differences in them, but when you just first look at them, you know, there's a lot of similarities. You can understand why, you know, you might think that things like, you know, the thrift's got lots of little flowers, the valerian's got lots of little flowers. You know, and when you look at the achillea there, you know, I mean, you can be a beginner could be forgiven to think, well, actually, they all look a bit like each other, really, don't they? But obviously, when you get close to them, you know, the type of inflorescence varies. The calyx, if they've got a calyx or not, because obviously the calyx is modified to a pappus in the dandelion family, and the Teesdale family, they have an epicalyx. I think they've been moved, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Obviously, the position of the ovary, number of stamens is very different, and so on. But you know, just on a first look, I do think I have to be aware of that situation. I mean, you know, you could, if you were kind of looking at these as a beginner, you can be forgiven to think, well, actually, that doesn't look that different from that. You know, I mean, obviously they are, but you know, I mean, that archeum doesn't look strikingly like a dandelion, does it? Really? So now I think the Psaceae have been moved. Somebody might tell me into the honeysuckle family, but I could be wrong about that. So again, there's quite a few in this family which can be a little bit confusing, and they're nice to look at anyway, aren't they? Sorry, I missed one out there. No, I haven't. And then the Jason. And so that's that family. And then going on to the carrot family, you know, again, I mean, I know if you turn them upside down, you obviously haven't got a head, but you can see where the kind of idea comes from. You know, you've got pignut and sweet cicely and hogweed there, and they've all, you know, look as if they've got clustered heads. But I think especially if you looked at the strantia, you know, I mean, it doesn't really look like anything in the Apiaceae, does it? So it does look a bit like a clustered head on a capitulum. So we'll have to think about that when the botanists are coming, the new botanists are coming in and are learning about all these things. And that's it, really. That's the talk for tonight.